record. Oh, hold on, Teresa's joining. All right, so it's just me on. So if you have questions in the chat, just put them in there and I'll look at them at the end, or I'll look at them periodically when I'm able to. But it's just a couple of you. So if you have a question, just please reach out. I am recording this to send it out because I know this, not all parents could join us at 8:15. I'm going to do a series of, college and post-secondary related sessions, and I'll try different times of the day to see what might work best for everyone, but they'll all be recorded. I also want you to know that a lot of this information is also either has been given to students, and particularly seniors, except for maybe some of the testing updates, the detail of it, and our juniors will also hear about this come late April, May. So strategically on my end, I don't get too much into college applications with juniors until a little bit later, because then they'll forget because it's not something they're using. But I wanted to share this with parents, and I'll also send you a copy of the recording, and I am happy to send a copy of the slideshow, which has most of the information in it. So, all right, we'll get started. So we're going to be looking at college admissions testing. I want to kind of give an overview and also talk about the current state of testing, because there's been a lot of changes over the past 2 years, and there's some upcoming changes to come in the next 2 years. And I get a lot of questions about testing, and so I'm hopeful that I can answer some of those with this. And then obviously any individual questions that might be related just to your specific student, we can answer outside of this presentation. So we'll talk about that current state. We'll get into maybe why students should test, who should test, when they might want to do this. I'll just briefly touch on testing accommodations, and then we'll jump into the college application process. A lot of it will be general, but some of it will be specific to Wye River practices and procedures. But again, it'll be a little bit of both. And then questions at the end. So the two main types of testing for college admissions that you all are probably familiar with, SAT and ACT. I'm often asked about the differences between those, which one maybe my student should take, would they do better on one over the other. So just a real quick glance at those. They're about the same amount of testing time. The ACT's 5 minutes longer currently. One of the differences is that the SAT has 2 math sections. One does not allow a calculator and one does, whereas the ACT allows a calculator for the entire math section. The SAT has some write-in math responses along with multiple choice, whereas the ACT is all multiple choice. So they're testing mostly similar information, even though their test is set up a little bit differently. The SAT is looking at challenging literary and information text, having questions based on comprehension. Their writing section has to do with the ability to revise and edit texts. And math is really based on algebra and data analysis. So this is not the SAT or ACT that you may have taken or I may have taken if you took one earlier, many years ago. It's actually very different. So it's been changed. I'll talk a little bit about the last change and an upcoming one that will affect our current 9th graders. But it's really not about memorizing vocabulary or anything like that, but about actually using skills within the context of the test. There's a lot of graphs. There's a lot of use of evidence, like understanding charts and data. It brings in social studies and science within the reading and writing sections, as well as the math. The ACT, however, has English and reading. It's mostly similar. Math, again, mostly similar besides the calculator use. But the ACT also has a section on science. So it's a dedicated section to science and data analysis. And that's another one of the big differences there. Scores are reported on the SAT in green, yellow, and red ranges. And the green is showing college readiness benchmark. The yellow is showing approaching that college readiness benchmark. Typically means within about a year of standards-based information, maybe behind the green benchmark. And then the red range is need to develop skills to be ready. So some current updates. And this is where I get a lot of questions, because this has been this testing has been just changing, every couple months over the last 2 years since the pandemic-related shutdowns. So at this current graduation year, so I know there's a couple of seniors on here, senior parents on here, last year and this year, so about more than 95% of higher education institutions have decided to let students decide whether to submit testing. And this is at selective schools, so your more competitive schools. Your less competitive schools have followed suit as well. Some schools have chosen to not review test scores at all, okay? So if we look at this current 2022 graduation year, our seniors who applied to four-year schools, just over 4% of colleges and universities actually required testing. So this is a huge flip from prior to the pandemic. 46% made it optional, and that was a temporary policy. Almost 42% made it optional as a permanent policy. Just under 10% are considered test blind, and what that means is they don't review them at all. So if a student sends them in, they don't even look at them. So they make all their admissions decisions without looking at a single SAT or ACT test. So these changes happened because of testing equity. Many of your SAT tests were canceled and couldn't be held, especially that end of that 2020 and fall of 2020 year. And then when you move into when things started opening back up again, there were still a lot of restrictions placed on testing. So how many students you could have in a testing room, how many, maintaining social distancing and things like that. And so not as many students were able to test. That is really the only reason that we at Wye River offered the SAT school test day last spring that a few students participated in, just to offer that opportunity. But many schools weren't able to offer that. It takes a lot of resources to offer an SAT, and you have to have qualified people on staff to administer it. And so a lot of schools aren't able to do that. We do not typically do that. That was probably a one-time thing for us because, again, of the resources it takes to offer an SAT. And so, because students weren't across the country, either didn't have access to testing, they couldn't get in. I know last year a couple of students like, I really want to test, and the closest open test site is New York. Well, we're not driving to New York, or you shouldn't drive to New York to take a test. And so colleges and universities recognize that. And that's where you're seeing these test optional or test blind decisions from schools that typically required it. What will that mean next year? So what will that mean for our juniors who will be applying for next year? So a lot of colleges will not update their admissions requirements if they're going to update them until late spring. So we don't know yet. Some schools may have already announced it. A lot of times it's got to go through their board and it's a big process to change. So will those temporary test optional institutions become required? Maybe some of them, maybe not. So not every school, even prior to the pandemic, required testing. And so I think this is important to know, because when I make recommendations or when we talk about maybe your particular student and testing, and we'll get into this in a minute, you know, should my student test? Is it worth them testing? There's a lot of different things to consider, and even more so now, because where they may be going may not require it. So I want, when we talk about that, I want you to consider this, because I think that we are, most parents are used to the fact that testing was almost, feel like testing was almost essential to get into a school. If you don't test, and if you don't test well, my student can't go to college, or they won't be accepted, or, you know, and there's a lot of that out there in this culture. There's a lot of that information, and I think that, you know, that leads to a lot of stress and anxiety around admissions, college admissions. But I want you to know this statistic: 80% of colleges accept a majority of their applicants. And so when we look at testing and your individual students' plan for testing, that's, I think, one of the things that you need to keep in mind, is that a majority, a pretty big majority, will accept most of their applicants, okay? With or without testing, or even testing that's not as high as maybe you would think. So it's that 20% that everybody focuses on. And so one of those individual things we have to consider is, you know, is your student going to apply to a school that might fall into that 20%, and where it might really make a difference to test and to have high test scores at the same time. So a lot of your college testing, admissions anxiety, again, is related to very top, selective, highly competitive schools. To give you an example of what some of those highly competitive schools are, some of your larger university, state universities, such as the University of Maryland College Park campus, would fall into that. They get a lot of applications, which makes them more competitive. Some of your Ivy League schools might fall into that, although many of them are temporarily test optional. So those are just some examples. And so thinking about where your student might fit or what their goals are will help to drive whether or not they really need to take a test, or how many times they might take a test. So, you know, I am often telling parents there's no standard or uniform process in how colleges review admissions applications, or what they might require for admissions. It is different for every single institution. There are some general guidelines that I can give you, but every single institution will have their own requirements, and maybe their own process on how they review applications. And so it really comes down to knowing the particular, once your student has chosen which schools they want to apply to, we can really look at what that particular school requires. So why might a student test? Again, it's one piece of the puzzle for colleges to consider. So your colleges that are doing holistic, what they call holistic admissions reviews, are looking at all pieces of the application, all parts of what your student is sharing with them. And this would just be one little piece of the puzzle, especially if it's a student with a high test score. Even a student with a average test score or slightly below average test score, some of these holistic schools, unless they're highly selective, it may or may not affect their application or their chance to be admitted to the school. Again, some schools aren't going to look at it at all. Most of your schools will tell you that GPA and high school transcript is the #1 thing they look at when reviewing applications. And so a high GPA, what classes they chose to choose to take in high school. So for us here, have they taken 4 years of a math? We only require 3. But these, schools are looking at, well, did they, if it's, they're comparing applications, they're looking at that student's schedule. Did they take 4 years of a math? Did they take 4 years of a science? Did they take their foreign language? Did they take, or did they take 4 years of elective classes? Mostly, besides core requirements. They might be so they're going to look at the strength of that student's schedule related to their individual school. When to test. So if your student's testing, then I typically always recommend June of their 11th grade year. A student can take an SAT or an ACT as many times as they want. Your students may not want to do that, but they can, and schools will take the highest scores. So if a student tests in June and their math score is higher than, let's say, if they test again in October, it could take the high math score from June and maybe the high reading and writing score from October and combine them. And so that is why many students will test more than once. Statistics also show testing more than once raises your score, and we see that here as well. Because you're more comfortable with the test, you're a little bit more familiar. An average of 100 points is what they typically say according to the statistics. So if a student is going to test, I recommend June just because it gives an opportunity for them to take the test again if they choose to. It also keeps a lot of information fresh. So if what you know about in June, we come back, it's usually the first weekend in October would be the next test. That first weekend in October, they've only been in school about a month. And so, June seems to be a good starting point for them. However, it is offered pretty much every month in the fall. So they can still test October, November, December, and so on. Again, whether your student tests or not, we can discuss in offline, because that will vary depending on their goals. So when we say who should test, it really depends on your student's goals. It depends on maybe timing of applications. It might depend on, we can look at PSAT scores or their practice test scores to gauge an idea of what their scores on an SAT might be. To kind of determine whether or not they should test, and if they test, whether they should take that test again. In general, prior to the pandemic, I always recommended students with higher scores on PSATs to test, because it leaves all options open. If they have a high PSAT score, they're likely going to have a high SAT score, leaves all options open, might also offer up opportunities for scholarships. So students can take an ACT. The reason that we do a lot of SAT here is because the SAT has more official practice tests than the ACT does. So it gives our students an opportunity starting in grades 9 to take a practice test each year. And we do administer those here each year. I know we missed some of those testing during the pandemic, but typically from grade 9 and 10 in the late spring. This year it's April 26th. More information will come out about that after spring break. The 11th grade official practice test is in October. And then again, if you choose to take an SAT, June at the earliest. There is a May test date as well, so May or June. Our students overall do well with a lot of practice. However, our students overall don't do a lot of independent practice. We are not teaching to the test in our classrooms. However, in math and English, they do have warm-ups related sometimes to testing questions. Our English and math teachers will talk a little bit about the format of the test. And they might, do some of the reading comprehension here and there. But these tests are really kind of designed to test what their skills that they're already learning in the classrooms according to standards. And so it's not, our classes aren't necessarily teaching to the test. So these additional practice tests are good for our students. And so having that opportunity to take a test each year for those who really need an SAT or want to take an SAT is very valuable. Whereas the ACT only offers one practice test. And so that's just kind of why we tend to go with that and here in school. However, students are able to take either one. Students can have additional practice through Khan Academy or through College Board. So College Board runs your SAT tests, or through ACT for additional practice tests from that. Those websites are very well built out, lots of practice available for the student who wants some independent practice. A lot of it is exposure. So exposure in our classrooms to reading and social studies and science, exposure to reading graphs and charts and tables and in multiple content areas is some of the skills that will come up in these tests. And so those are things that they're getting inside the classroom. Accommodations, the process is that I typically, I apply through Wye River for Wye River students directly with the College Board for accommodations. So it's not an automatic given that a student who has accommodations in school here with us, or even a student in a public school with a 504 IEP plan, those counselors are still having to apply for these accommodations through the College Board itself. So it doesn't carry into your school-based accommodations, don't automatically apply to these tests. There is no application for 9th graders. So I start the process typically late fall of 10th grade year in reviewing students' files, looking to see what, based on observations, what they might need. We take pretty detailed observations when 9th graders test. And so I can look and see how much time did they use? Did they run out of time? Were they extra fidgety? Did they what kind of, I'm taking observations based on what they might need for a future test. And so we'll start that process 10th grade year. Sometimes we might need to reapply. Maybe there's an accommodation we don't apply for 10th grade year because we weren't sure it would be necessary. And then 11th grade year, we reapply and add an accommodation or change something up. And all of that is possible. College Board is looking for documentation. So it is not based on any school's word or any individual's word that a student needs this. We have to submit actual documentation that a student has a diagnosed disability. And that diagnosis might be a learning disability, it might be ADHD, it could be a medical, like a diabetic who might need to have food available or things like that. So it could be medically related, it could be learning related, but they have to have an actual diagnosis from someone who is qualified to make that diagnosis. So I take that information, we submit all of that, and through SAT anyway, they say up to 6 weeks, but depending on what we're asking for, I sometimes get an answer within a week. So it just depends on what we're asking for. Sometimes it could take a little bit longer. So that's that process. But again, I'm collecting observations from teachers in the classroom. as well as when they actually do take a test, let's say 9th grade year, when they take a test 10th grade year, we're still making those same observations to see if something has changed. The biggest question I am asked is about extra time. So 50% extra time is the general accommodation for a student who qualifies for that extra time. I will say we are cautious about applying for that. We want to be sure a student needs it. I've been giving these tests for many, many years, and a student that has extra time and doesn't need extra time, even though they may qualify for it and be eligible for it, it can be detrimental to that student when testing if they don't need it. They're required to sit for that extra time. So you're taking a 3.5-hour test and you're adding another 1.5 hours plus. So we're looking at now a 5-hour test. And if they don't use that time, they are sitting in there. And because these tests are standardized, there's no eating. There's breaks are at specific times. They're pretty much, if they finish their test earlier than that 1.5 times, they're sitting there. And so for some of our students, that can be more harmful than it is helpful. And so we take a look at that, and that's why we're taking those observations to see how much, if they're using it and if they really need it. And sometimes, again, that's why we might make changes a little bit later. So just real quick, the SAT was redesigned in 2016. That's when they changed over from that memorization, memorize all the vocabulary. They changed over from that style to really a focus on skills, comprehension. They're looking at content and everything that's more relevant to what our students are learning in classrooms today. What I want to focus on, though, is there's another redesign coming up, and they're in the process of doing that now. They were somewhat in the process of doing this pre-pandemic. However, I think the pandemic has really changed the mindset of colleges and universities, these companies, these businesses that design these tests, to say if we want these tests to still be used, then we're going to have to look at this a little bit differently. Or it's starting to kind of fade out. Colleges and universities aren't using it as much. And their data is kind of showing, well, our students are doing, that we're admitting, are doing fine, even though we didn't screen them using an admissions test. And so the next redesign will actually take place in March 2024. And so that's the first testing that will happen with it. That is going to affect our current 9th graders. And so our current 9th graders will be the ones to first take this test. I don't think I have any current 9th graders on with me right now on this call, but just to give you a general idea, I've listed some of the changes they're making. It will be an all digital test. There will be some paper options available, but for the most part, it will be all digital. It's going to be much shorter, so about 2 hours long. I think that's going to benefit a lot of students, not only ours here at White River, but many students. They will get their results back quicker. It will be adaptive. And so if a student is answering questions correctly, might get a little more challenging. If they're missing a lot in a row, it might lower the level of it somewhat. They say they're still testing the same skills and content. There will be calculator allowed for the entire test, and there's going to be direct supportive accommodations. So I think that this redesign could work really well for our student population, but we'll have to see in a couple of years. All right. I want to switch now into the college admissions process. Again, this is a lot of information. And so if you have questions, we'll open it up at the end. And if you have individual based questions that you don't want to ask here, you can reach out to me afterwards. and we will talk about this. This is really just so that you're aware of how we do things here with the college admissions applications process, and to give you a real nice overview of it. Most of the common questions that I receive here. So when we're looking at college applications, I've kind of grouped them into two categories. Your two-year community colleges / trade programs, because your community colleges have both skilled trade programs as well as associate's degree programs, and your four-year college and universities, because the application process is very different. This is a general outline. Community college, there's an online application. It takes 10 to 15 minutes. It really can be completed at home by the student, sometimes without any support. It's just asking basic information on there, and it's pretty quick. They're typically free. There might be a fee if you're applying to a community college that's out of state. But generally the applications are free, at least they are here if you're a Maryland resident. And then the last part would be, I always recommend students apply for an institutional scholarship. And again, that can be, it's a quick application for our Maryland-based community colleges, and that can be completed at home. That information typically comes out around March of senior year, maybe late February, and I typically send those out by email when I get them, and would recommend that students fill that out. Four-year colleges and universities, a little bit different. So still an online application, can be completed at home by the student with support from their parent, their advisor here at school. I also support students as well here with that application. Here's the big difference, is these are those applications that you're used to hearing about. They take a lot of time, although not as much as they used to. There's an essay typically, okay? And I want you to know that all of our 10th and 11th grade English classes write college application essays based on the Common App essay selection. And so they're doing that whether they're college bound or not. It's part of the writing process. And so they're learning how to write about themselves. They're learning how to write an essay based on a question being asked. The Common App gives, I believe, 10 different essay options. And so you might think 10th grade, that's a way for them to start it in Mr. Baker's class. They complete one then, they complete a second one in 11th grade. So that's a part of his curriculum. 12th grade year, they might use one of those essays. I mean, why take the time to write another one? But some students will write a third essay. Some will pull one of those 10th or 11th grade essays and maybe edit them, make sure they're exactly what they want them to be before they send them out. So they aren't starting senior year, unless they're new to our school, they aren't starting senior year without having some resources that they can use towards this application. Student resume is a part of it. It's not an official looking resume. It's just questions asked within the application, such as what are your activities? Do you participate in community service and things like that. 1 to 3 letters of recommendation, and I'm going to show you how that works, but that's requested in the Naviance program by the student, and they're sent out by the school. So they're sent out by us. I say 1 to 3 because some schools, some colleges will only accept 1, some will accept 2, and some will accept up to 3. Every individual school sets their own requirements. I've even seen schools that don't take any. And so that just depends on their review process. Most, but not all, of your four-year colleges and universities will charge application fees. And I've seen that ranging anywhere from $30 to maybe $75 at the higher end. But sometimes they're free. So especially for our juniors, if their goal is a 2-year program, if their goal is a community college, whether it's a degree program at a community college or a trade program, This is sort of the recommended timeline. I push this information out during the school year, beginning senior year. All of you will get information and reminders about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. That application opens October 1st. For the state of Maryland eligibility, it closes March 1st. That's for the state, not federal. That opens up your opportunities for students to be eligible for financial aid based on need, as well as most scholarships, whether those scholarships are based on need or not. I also send you, we aren't doing our own anymore, but we partner typically with Chesapeake College. There'll be an evening financial aid session. It's been on Zoom lately, which is convenient. And I'll send that out. That's typically occurs October, where you can join in and find out all the ins and outs of that financial aid process. So I would recommend applying online to your community college by March. If you do it later, that's completely fine. They can actually apply all the way up until mid-August, before starting in late August. So there's not really a deadline for it. However, if you want to be able to register as soon as registration opens, I think it's just a nice checkbox to have it done by March, and focus on the next part of the process. Again, that institutional scholarship, typically available beginning in March. Placement testing. Some students will need placement testing to get for the community college, not to be accepted, but to know what English and math classes, whether the student is starting at a college level English or math class, or whether they need a skills-based class prior. Not every student will need placement testing. Again, unfortunately, there's no uniformity, even within the state of Maryland. So those colleges' website will give the most recent information. It changes as well, it can change year to year, but in general, a student with a 3.0 GPA on their transcript would not need placement testing in English. A student who has a C or better in Algebra 2, as noted on their transcript, would not need placement testing for math. Those are general, it's not every little option, but that's a general rule of thumb for our community colleges that are more local. If they need placement testing, then I always recommend do it in April. That's when they've had the most math instruction, so hold off on it a little bit. You know, late April or mid to late April, or whenever you can have it scheduled. I know that our community colleges are, now you can actually do it online digitally, or you can go into their testing centers. So, but you have to make an appointment. So our current seniors looking at this process, when we get back from spring break, I will email out my recommendations for you know, what I think they're gonna need. And if they need that placement testing, you can schedule that with the individual community college. I've already spoken with a couple of people about that as well. Registration typically for your fall classes opens up in May. And you know, the sooner you register, the more options you have for availability. You can register in late August if you want, but you may not, you might be stuck in those 8 a.m. classes, which you may not prefer. You might not have your more popular classes, might fill up. And so the earlier you register, the better. And again, registration typically opens up in mid-May. Applying for accommodations, I'm not going to get into that in this session because it's too much information. However, that would happen over the summer if they're needed. All right, so our 4-year program kind of timeline for senior year. Again, that financial aid application, it's the same one. It opens at the same time. I typically recommend students apply online using the Common App. There is a link to the website here. I'm not going to show you the website, but I'll give you an overview of what the Common App is in just a little bit. Deadlines for your 4-year colleges vary. from, and we'll talk about this in a moment as well, from early deadlines in October, typically through February. Some might have a little bit later deadline, or rolling admissions. We asking for recommendations. So I recommend to students, we will do this in May, June this year for our juniors, is I will be meeting with juniors. I'm going to have them choose who they would like two letters of recommendations to come from. One should be a core teacher, English, math, social studies, science. The second one could be any teacher. You can also have a recommendation sent from outside of the school as a second one. These colleges want to see at least a school representative, a teaching representative, but they might have, if they've done a whole lot of, if they play a sport, or if they've been extremely active in a particular organization, then they will also take letters of recommendation from those individuals. I say no later than September because there's nothing worse than a student, and this happens every year, coming in my office and saying, my application is due in 3 days, and I've asked 2 teachers to give me a recommendation. And I said, okay. That means that you have given your teachers 2 days to write you a stellar letter of recommendation, hopefully, turn that in, and then for it to be submitted. And teachers are busy. And so typically our teachers get it done, but that's not great for anyone. It's not great for the teacher. It's not great for me, who has to send them all out. And it's not a good idea for that student to be that late with that request, because it can be hard to turn them around in the beginning. And so ideally, the earlier you ask, the better it's going to be. And that's why I'm going to be prompting juniors late this year to choose who they'd like to recommend. Go ahead and talk to those teachers, ask for if they will give them a recommendation, even if they don't know exactly where they're applying to, because teachers might start writing and crafting those over the summer, even early next school year. They can always alter them to be more specific to a certain school, but at least that most of that recommendation is ready to go. So, so there's no rush and everything meets deadlines. I'll talk about how students should request those in a little bit. However, it says it right here, request transcript and recommendations to be sent. We do that in Naviance. And I say at least 3 weeks prior to the deadline. We can meet the last minute requests. We always have, but it puts a lot on teachers to do that if it's recommendations, or us to make sure everything is set up and sent out to meet those deadlines. So we don't like to cut it that close for something that's important. You don't have to commit with the chosen school until early May of senior year. And again, applying for those accommodations over the summer. A quick overview of the Common App. Students will be introduced to this. Juniors will be introduced to this come May into June of this year, and again next fall. The benefit of the Common App is that the student can prepare one application and send it to many different schools. And so if a student is applying to 4 schools, they do not have to complete 4 separate applications. They complete one application and send it to those 4 schools. So it's a lot less time to complete. It makes the process much easier. More than 900 colleges will accept the Common App. There are some that do not, but for the most part, most of them will. There's now a mobile option, so students can add, edit, and see things through Common App on their phones, which we know that that's what students like to do. It also links up to our Naviance program, which allows the student and myself to track applications. I can see when the student has submitted applications. They can see when the school has submitted records. And so it provides for a real nice place to keep track of everything. The student, when they get started, Again, first thing they can do is create their own account and then start gathering or thinking about information to include, such as what activities have they done the last 4 years, what's community service, if they have any work experience, any academic honors and awards. Those are the things that will be asked in that application. When it's available, typically around midsummer, they can link their Common App account to their Naviance account. I help them and prompt them to do this when we come back to school in September of their senior year. They can do it on their own, however, they don't need me, but if they haven't done it or aren't aware, then I help them through that. That option doesn't become available until over the summer, so it's not something we can do before they leave here junior year for the summer. So they can add colleges they're interested in. I will show you a bit of the Naviance program in a moment, but they can add colleges they're interested in Naviance and in Common App, and that helps to link so that both of those sites are on the same page. So the other thing I'll just mention about college applications, obviously we will help here. Parents, you're gonna need to help a little bit, but it really should be student driven. So a student who is completely unable to complete these applications or completely unmotivated to complete these applications is sometimes a time when we need to sit back and think about, is this student truly ready for this process? It should be student driven. That does not mean that they can't accept help in editing or having someone review their application. They should do that. That's good practice, but they should be the ones kind of driving it. And that's hard. I know it's hard as a parent, especially if you have a student that's not doing that, because you want them to apply. But if you're doing all the work, if the school is doing all the work, then it might be time to kind of consider what's the goal and what's the plan for that individual. So just a few pieces of information that often are asked or pop up, and then I want to show you a little bit of that Naviance application and save a little bit of room for any general questions. Again, every college gets to choose their own admissions requirements. So there's no, typically it's an application, typically it's an essay, typically it's those letters of recommendation and a transcript. How many letters of recommendation they accept varies. Some even have an additional essay that they require. Some even ask some additional, like very short answer questions, and some don't require an essay. So it's very individual. So when your student doesn't have a list of schools they're applying to, then we're looking at those generals. Like, let's just be prepared for the general average requirements. But you may need to do a little bit more once you've chosen a particular school. Within the Common Application and in Naviance, there's something called a FERPA release. And students have to sign that in Common App, and when they link their Naviance account, it carries that FERPA over. And what that does is it gives us permission to send their records. Without that signed by the student, it's not signed by the parent, without that signed, we are unable to share their records. And so that's something we'll look at with juniors as well when we start the year, but sometimes that's not signed and that delays sending records. And we want those to be, we don't want to have any delays, but basically it's giving us permission to send confidential records to another institution, but it's done within the applications. This is just a reminder because this happens to me all the time. This is quoted directly from the Common App website. If your high school uses Naviance, which we do, you will not request counselor or teacher recommendations through the Common App. You're gonna add those in Naviance, and I do my best to set students up for that, but they still kind of oftentimes tend to forget, or maybe a parent isn't aware, and that's why we're bringing it up now, bring it up again once school starts the next fall. But once those accounts are linked, everything goes through Naviance. That way I can track and be sure things are sent. So if stuff isn't sent through Naviance, then I can't tell you if a teacher sent a recommendation. But if it goes through Naviance, then I can see it and say, yes, it was sent and it was sent on this date. I can even tell if the college opened it and accepted it. And but if it goes out other ways, I can't track it. And it's harder for the student to track as well. So that's one of the benefits of doing it this way. I mentioned earlier deadlines for four-year colleges. And I do want to touch on this. This is very different than when you and I attended college. Could be different if they have older siblings that attended college. In general, there's three types: early applications, regular admissions, and rolling admissions. There's some schools will have two types of early applications. These are typically due around October 15th through November 1st in general. There's early decision and early action. And if for an individual school, look very carefully at that wording, because they can call it something different as well. One is binding and one is not. Binding early decision application, what that means is that student is 100% committed to attending that school if they are accepted. And if they send their application in for that deadline and they're accepted, then they are bound to attend that school for 4 years. It can increase your chances of acceptance at a more competitive school, but again, they have to know this is where I want to go and I don't want to go anywhere else to make that decision. So that is not a decision many students are ready to make come October. Early action is non-binding, so you're still submitting, again, that October, early November deadline, but it's not binding. That's a great time if your student knows where they want to apply to, if they've got a good transcript, if they've got a good solid application, to send that in, because then those schools will review them early. You'll know if you're accepted prior to Christmas. Some of them, earlier than that. If a school is unsure at that time, they may push that application into regular decision because they want to see more senior year grades. So sometimes it depends on what the student submits, what's on their transcripts. They might say, oh, we're going to wait because we want to see what you're doing senior year. Because by, again, mid-October, there's not even first quarter senior grades on there. Okay, rolling admissions means that a school will accept applications until they are full. There are many great schools that do rolling admissions. Tends to be your smaller schools. For most of our students, that's where they want to attend. It's not often that we have a student from here that wants to attend a very large university. It happens, but it's not as often. And so some of those rolling admission schools are great because, a senior who's maybe not quite sure of what they want to do until later in spring, it still provides those opportunities for them. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I want to quickly show you the Naviance program, and let me see, my computer may have logged out of it. Hold on. All right, let me share again. Here we go. Okay. When the student logs into the Naviance program, this is similar to the screen they will see there might be some different messaging on it, but this is similar to that. And we are only, just because this talk is about colleges, when you click on colleges, there is a place where they can add colleges that they're thinking about. In this particular example, there's a few schools added in here, so you can see that. Just gonna, in order for them to send, to request transcripts and to request letters of recommendation, and I help students with this here at school, but I just want to show everyone. They will move this to colleges that they are applying to. And I'm not even reading all this, just to show you what that looks like. Okay, once they're in the colleges I'm applying to list, then they can request transcripts. And this is where they are granting permission for me to send their records to another school. So it's an important step. It's always the initial transcript. Once it's requested, then I know. I get an email alert. I'm also in this a lot as seniors are applying, and I can prepare and send their most up-to-date transcript. This is also where they will request letters of recommendation. So they will go in here and they will add a request. They will let us know what school, because you can individualize schools or you can send it to all schools. So they might say, I would like Mr. Baker to send a letter of recommendation to all of these schools I'm applying to. They can add a little note and then hit submit request. And that's when Mr. Baker gets an alert that a student has requested a recommendation to be sent. I can see it as well. And between the student, myself, Mr. Baker, and reminders as needed, again, better if it's done early, fewer reminders, but if it's more last minute, then we can make sure that those are sent on time. It also tells us due dates. So it's nice and easy. It's great for the teachers who aren't as aware of due dates for college applications as I am. So they can look and say, okay, October 1st in this particular example is, so they might write one letter that goes to all 4 of these institutions, and they can all, and it will all be ready by October 1st. Now I say you can customize, because, and where I would recommend that is, let's say if they're applying to one art school, then they may want to include more art-based teachers for that art school. If they're applying to a school that one of our staff here or teachers here has graduated from, they're an alumni of, they might want to specifically ask that teacher to send a letter to that school, and because they're an alumni. So there's a couple of times where they may have a reason to ask different teachers to send different recommendations, but that's individualized. So all of this, what's nice, let me go back. All of this is in Naviance. Under the colleges tab, colleges I'm applying to, manage transcripts, letter of recommendations. We do not send test scores, but they can add test scores in here as well. And so this is just, again, like a quick overview. All right, I am gonna stop sharing my screen, and it's right at 9:17. I had said this would go till about 9:15, but if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or you can think it over and email them to me. This was a lot of information, so please feel free to think it over. It's supposed to be a big overview. I'm sure that you will have some questions, and you can always reach out to me after spring break as well. But if anyone has any questions now, feel free. All right. Well, if not, this has been recorded, and I will send that out to you. It might be right after spring break, but you'll get the recording, as well as other parents at the school will get the recording. You'll also, at the same time, I'll also send a copy of the slide presentation so you can see some of this and look through it at your own pacing or refer back to it later on in the year. Thank you so much for joining us, joining me. And I'll have a few more of these focused on specific topics between now and the end of this school year, and probably do them at some different times, since I know not everyone's available at the same time. And again, you know where I am, so feel free to send me anything. Yes, Tranisha?
Yes, I just dropped a question in the chat box. Is Naviance also used when you need letters of recommendation for scholarships?
That's a great question. It is not.
Okay.
Yeah, so what you've been doing, or what Jared's been doing, is fine. Is recommendations for scholarships can just come straight to me.
Okay.
I can, whether it comes, a lot of times I have recommendations at that point of time that might be able to be used. And if I don't, if it's something that's real specific, then I can help coordinate that with teachers if it needs a teacher recommendation.
So sending you the information like I did in the past, sending you the information where it needs to go sufficient?
Yes, that's fine. Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Good question. You're welcome. Yeah, only for, and now I'll pull these recommendations from Naviance if they're applicable to an outside scholarship, but Naviance will typically only send to the university or college.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, have a great day. Have a great spring break next week. Hopefully we'll have some non-rainy weather. And I look forward to hearing and seeing you all soon.